Hi, everyone. We're doing International Women's Day that I'm turning into International Women's Month. And the theme for this International Women's Day is inspire inclusion. And so the way I'm handling that is by only talking to inspiring women who I admire, who I love, who I really look up to in some way, and who I have a great relationship with. So today I'm talking to my best friend in the whole wide world, Jelisa. So we know each other. We've known each other for a long time. We met through church stuff back in the day when I first moved to Albuquerque. And we've been friends all these years. So we were just trying to figure out, I think I've lived away from Albuquerque longer, about the same amount of time I lived in Albuquerque through our friendship. So it's been a long journey as friends. So we want to talk a little bit about friendship and about kind of what that looks like, but also we're going to talk about Jalisa's journey in healthcare. So I'll turn it over to you, and you can introduce yourself and tell us anything you want the room to know.
Okay. Well, I'm Jelisa, and right now I'm living in Flagstaff. I've got two of my own kids, 28 and 26-year-old, and then I have a couple of bonus kiddos, a 22 and a 20-year-old. So lots of kids in their 20s, trying to figure life out. And I remind them it's okay because I'm still figuring life out too.
Right.
Lots to do. So I've raised a handful of kids. I've journeyed through a couple of different partnerships, and currently I'm working as an ICU nurse practitioner in our medical ICU here in Flagstaff. And I've done some training too and some midwifery work, and so I have just a lot of experience in acute care. And a little bit of experience kind of in this other realm of women's health. And so, I mean, that's a basic gist of where I am right now, but
Yeah.
super watered down. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I mean, I know your dad's a doctor and, and then that you grew up in a home where he was going to med school and then was a doctor and all of that. But what was the draw into healthcare for you, and kind of what was that journey to where you are now?
Right. So I think that was a big draw, was my dad's kind of own journey and being old enough to watch it and sit. He started med school when I started sixth grade, and then he finished his residency when I graduated high school. So that whole part of my growing up was watching my dad do that, and obviously having a child's perspective on it, not an adult perspective of what that journey really was for him, but kind of my view of it. And I found it really intriguing. I think too, there's a big part of healthcare, and which can encompass like so many different aspects of people care, right? Not just hospital or even nurse versus doctor, any of those things, but it's such a big realm. But just wanting to make a difference and take care of people. So graduating from high school, I sort of had this intent of going on to med school. Wasn't super like focused and driven to do it, but it was something that I was it was high on my list. And I got a little diverted
By the cutest version of a diversion.
by a pretty cute version of who's now a giant version of cute. Yeah, so I ended up getting pregnant and getting married, and just knew that going the route of med school and residency and all of that was not something I wanted to do with kids.
Mhm.
Because of my own experience. So I kind of shifted, I pivoted, and I went the direction of nursing. And so I found myself, as my kids got into elementary school, being able to go back to school full time myself, and then kind of going down the path of nursing. Ended up in the ICU, worked as a bedside nurse for 9 years. Well, I guess it would be about 8 years, 7.5 years. Went back to school, got my master's as an acute care nurse practitioner, and then completed that. and then transitioned kind of out of medical ICU. I did some stuff in trauma and neurosurgical and the surgical world, and then transitioned back into a medical aspect. And so really, like, this May, I will have been working ICU since 2006. So it's that 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's really been waxing and waning for me. I love it some days. I hate it a lot of days. It's a very difficult environment. And I find myself in this role. It's a middle ground role, and it's tough to be diplomatic on both ends of it. But I did think that I would transition and go into women's health, and I did. I went to school. I went back to school, and I finished that program. I think it'll be 2 years ago in the summer.
Yeah.
About a year and a half ago. While I was in that program getting my midwifery degree, the birthing center closed here in Flagstaff. It's a pretty small community. There's not a lot of huge opportunity here. And I haven't pursued it heavily. Also, at the start of going to school, I started in April, like at the very beginning of April 2020, which was right when the first wave of the pandemic was happening. So that schooling was a little bit different. It was completely new, the way that they did a lot of our teaching and instruction. Everything was online. Clinicals were difficult. And obviously that the whole experience of COVID kind of shifted and changed a lot of perspective on how all of us view healthcare.
All the perspectives.
All the perspectives. So
yeah.
So that's kind of where I find myself now, in this spot of, again, where am I gonna go from here?
Right. I mean, it's notable to also say you live with and are married to an ICU doctor as well. So it's all ICU all the time.
So there's a lot of a lot of intense care talked about.
A lot of acute care going on. and that played a part in the intensity of your COVID experience, because you were both in it, right? Like all the time. So so that's one of the things that we talked about discussing here. Like, we obviously had very different COVID experiences. I was in a massive lockdown in Germany, right? Like, we were not allowed to go almost anywhere. We could only see a handful of people. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't, there was for stretches of time across 2 years, the only way to go anywhere was to be tested, right? Constantly, right? And it was just a lot. And there were like the first year, like in 2020, it was the first year I hadn't come home to the States at any point all year, because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to get back. Like, it wasn't, I could always come to the States. I'm a citizen, right? But I didn't want to travel unvaccinated. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to get back in, because there were so many restrictions happening. And so it was so isolating and so, like, I just felt so alone, and, it was super hard. Meanwhile, you and I are talking all the time, and you're, changing in a bucket and bleaching things, and
right.
Like, it was just such a different experience. So maybe talk a little bit about, how that, I mean, obviously you work that kind of acute care a lot, but how that experience was different.
It was hugely different. I mean, in 2009, we had sort of the H1N1 flu was like super bad. And that was a big deal to kind of go through that. And so it's kind of like, well, this is coming. Okay. Like, we've done sort of a pandemic before, kind of more known or whatnot. And we had a lot of people die in 2009 that were, younger, and we and then all of a sudden it was like on us. And it was a very fast transition from kind of day-to-day regular ICU kind of stuff to needing to protect ourselves and, all that. And it was a huge transition. It's really surreal to think about now, if I go back to that kind of space and think about it. And the weird thing that was about it too is, we would go to work and everything, most of the hospital was crickets minus the ICU, and we took over multiple units and we expanded wildly during that time. And there were multiple meetings every day trying to strategize and figure things out. And it was just, there was so much. And so we would go to work and we would be in these environments where we would be in sort of these units where we would don our whole suits and have our cappers on and go in and take care of people. And the nurses were stuck. I mean, the nurses got the brunt of it for sure. And then, we would spend days and days and days and do this. And it would just like, we would come home and just scrub and clean and like sleep a little bit and go back and do it. And then we would have some days off and it would feel like, is that really happening? So I can only imagine what it was like for the people that weren't walking into these units and these halls and seeing things so different on so many levels, to just be out in a world where you're like, really, why are we doing all of this? Because even when we would have 2 or 3 days off at a time, then we would start to be like, wait, is this real or is it not? And then we would have to back into it and be like, oh no, it's really real. It's really real.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting little journey, and then transition out to right when things started coming back down. And we've had little waves here and there, but nothing like that initial brunt where we took the brunt of kind of the reservation really. And the huge the population that was affected there. That's really what we took a huge brunt of that.
Yeah. And I think there was so much, I mean, it became such a political issue and it became such a, families were arguing about it and do we vaccinate or not? And you all as healthcare, healthcare professionals could say like, well, I don't want to vaccinate, but I have to in order to do this job. So there were all these conversations as well. And yet here, and so, cause I would have some of these conversations happening around me, like, oh, we're making a bigger deal. It's just the flu. And I'm like, okay, sure. You can say that. And eventually, yes, it will be just a version of the flu, right? But today hospitals are full and there's not even enough places to put dead bodies. And, in Germany, they were storing dead bodies in like hotels, in like the giant freezers in hotels, because nobody could stay in a hotel because they were all in lockdown. And they didn't know where to put bodies before they could bury them. Right. And funerals were backed up and all these things were happening. And so when people would sort of be these deniers, you're like, okay, but my friend's tired, right? I know that she's really pragmatic and very tactical and she's exhausted. So something's real that's happening in this situation, right? So, so I think that it was hard to sort of balance that annoyance at like, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? You can pretend it's not real, but there's hospitals and hospitals full of people, and I mean, at the very beginning, you also, everybody was still struggling with like PPE and what do we have and what's available.
No, we were our N95s. We would put a hashtag on it each time we used it. And then I think we threw them in like a bucket and they were cleaning them with, whatever UV process or hydrogen peroxide or whatever. And we just, I don't know, we would try to find the one with the least number of hashtags on it.
That's awesome.
So, I mean, we never didn't have N95s.
Right.
It's just that they were being used so much.
Right.
So it was a big deal, the PPE and exposure, and we just didn't understand enough about it to know what exactly we were.
And I remember like talking to you and saying like, well, what if I remember, I specifically remember one time you saying Keith had come home and said, man, my gear came off today while I was turning a patient, so I'm probably going to get COVID.
Right.
Right. And I said, well, what will happen if he gets COVID? And you're like, he'll go to work.
Yeah.
Because I mean, he can't not. There wasn't anyone
right.
else to go. Right. So it's not like what are you going to do? Just get in a cycle of infection, right? Like everybody's, you're getting in, but I just remember being like, oh gosh, there's no days off, right? That's not like the rest of us were like, I feel sick, I'm going to bed, right? And you guys are like, I feel sick, I got to go to the hospital, right? Because there are sick people, right?
Right. So, there are sicker people for sure.
Yeah. So it was such an act of, I mean, it took, obviously the job itself, I know from knowing you, takes courage because you sit with death and dying a lot, right?
Right.
but then it's like this extra measure of like, take it up a notch, right?
It was, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
it was just not so much, but also it was hard because those families had to be separated and,
yeah. Like, here's your iPad to say goodbye to your loved one, right?
yeah,
Oh,
here's you watching your loved one die over Zoom and the whole
right.
family wailing. It was, yeah,
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
some weird,
Yeah.
some
I mean, you and I
things.
talk a lot. I know we have talked a lot about, as you studied midwifery and women's health, and we talk a lot about like, okay, what does women's health look like, and how do we, make sure there's access and make sure people have better, and how do we just have conversations about things that we just haven't talked about before. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was like, there are so many conversations as women that we don't have, even with other women.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think at this stage, what do you think holds us back as women from having conversations about menopause and the things about pregnancy we don't talk about, and, birth control and those kinds of things? What do you think holds us back?
That's a good question. I mean, I think if you go and like into the clinic setting and you're in a room and you're sitting with your provider and it's the time crunch, right?
Yeah.
Like there's numbers to meet. We've got to see, you got to move people through. You just have to hit the high points and get moving.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of like, well, this must only be happening to me. So I don't know if I should bring it up, and sort of like, not like a huge shame factor, but like a lot of times, like, oh, heading into menopause and your estrogen's waning and you start having some incontinence issues or something
Right.
like that. No
Right.
one talks about it
Right.
because heaven forbid, and there's easy fixes for things most of the
Yeah.
time. And the earlier you talk about stuff, the better it is. And I think we just sort of are in this space where we really start doubting that, anyone else might experience this
Right.
or that someone even wants to talk to us about it.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
And so
I
we
mean, what
just,
everyone should do is get their very own nurse practitioner.
right, your
So,
personal
I mean,
concierge.
but people who don't know me very well don't know that. I mean, I regularly will say, I have a rash right here. Do you think I'm dying? And you're like, you're not dying. When
I
did
think,
you get it? Right? Why do you have a rash? Where did it come from? And, but I also think that has been, I think it's made it easier for me to talk to other women about bodies and health and things because we've always done that, because I knew I
right,
could ask you questions. And so
yeah,
I learned how to say, like, yeah, I had this happen. Have you ever had that experience with other women? Right. Or if they asked me something, I would answer instead of being like, oh, I don't talk about incontinence, or whatever. No, I'm menopausal and I'll ask the question, right? Or whatever. So um, I think it makes
and
a
I
difference.
think that as we've headed into this menopausal kind of place, we've had more conversations and we've said, like, what do you think about this? Have you seen that? Have you read this article? Did you know?
Yeah.
It's sort
Yeah.
of an interesting space to head into, and it's sort of the idea of as your estrogen wanes, you care a little bit less about the nurture of those around you. You start
Right.
being a little bit more like, the hell's going on? Like, let's
Get your
talk
shit
about this
together.
because
Do your
it's
job.
not okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying to another one of the people I interviewed. Like, as I've taken this coaching for menopausal women course, I regularly say to you, like, did you know this? And also, why don't we talk about it? And also, I'm pissed off. And you're like, yeah, welcome to women's health. Right. Like, that's just so many things that make me mad. And then you're
Right. Or I'm like, no one told me that. And I'm
right.
looking stuff up too, because it's such a small, it just doesn't get, it gets touched on here and there, but even going through, and obviously he's midwifery, so we focused in a lot on reproductive and this kind of stuff. But I mean, I think that was one of the things I struggled with in the program too, is that it's that portion of that period of pregnancy and birth is such a small part
Yeah.
of so many of our lives. Like there's so much more. Like if you
Right.
just back out and look at the big picture, like there's so many things from little girls to sweet old ladies. Like we just
Yeah.
we need to understand better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is so much shame around bodies, right? Women's bodies in particular,
Yeah,
right? And that we're just like, oh, we don't talk about that stuff. We've sexualized the body of women,
yeah,
but we don't talk about the bodies of women, right? And because they are not the centerpiece of the medical establishment or, legislation or whatever, women's bodies are legislated differently than men's and
Yes,
treated
they are.
differently than, so there's all of these kind of factors, I think, that then make us, and I think what you said before, we just so often are like, this must just be me. I must just be this much. I mean, I remember a year and a half ago asking you one day if you thought I had early onset dementia, right? And I was like, do you think I have dementia? Because I keep forgetting words. And you were like, I think you have perimenopause. And I was like, am I going to get better? Right? You're like, maybe.
What they say. That's what I
But,
read.
so you just have these moments of like, am I the only person who's experiencing this? Right? Am I losing my mind? Is that what's happening? And so having friends and women and resources to say, because I mean, you can search the internet and get 5 answers. One of them will be, yes, you are getting this is early onset dementia, and the other will be, you're not even in menopause, right? Like it, who the hell knows? So yeah. Okay, let's transition to the topic of friendship, because I think we're kind of talking about it already, because that is what this is, we talk about those things together. But we have been friends since before Corinne was born.
Great. It's like
So,
fall 1997.
yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah.
And I think, I think it's fun to think about. We joke about sometimes how Cameron, your son, introduced us. So, we were at at this Christian Student Center, which is at UNM, and I was sitting next to, I was actually sitting next, Cameron was sitting between us, I think.
Great. He was, yeah.
And I mean, he was so funny and turned to me and said, do you want to see my mom's baby? And you were very, very pregnant. And I was like, sure. Yeah, okay. And so he like pulled your shirt up to show me your baby, right? You were like, Cameron. And I mean, you've said like that was not his thing. He didn't do that. It wasn't like he showed people your belly all the time.
No, that was very like he's a chatty kid, always has been,
Right.
always will be, but he definitely, I was like, we don't even do this at home. What are you doing? Like it was such a funny little thing for him, just like, you see my mom's baby? Like, okay.
Sure. I guess. Nice to meet you and your baby, right?
Well, yeah, there we go. I mean,
yeah. So apparently he wanted us to be friends, right?
that's what his job was that day. And
yeah, exactly. And then we've been friends ever since. And it's been, in the early years, we were sort of friends in a group and we had other friends and we, did Bible studies together. And then as time went on and some of those friendships fall away or things change, we sort of kept each other, some of the other friends as well, but we sort of really established a connection that was like us. This is our friendship.
Right.
And like I said at the beginning, like across all those years, I've lived half of that time in Albuquerque and half of that time away, right? About half. So what do you think, when you think about sort of that the longevity of a friendship like that, of our friendship, what do you think makes it work?
Well, probably just both of our willingness to give each other like give and take, right? And so there's been a lot of times where one of us is really, things are going on, we're distracted, we've got whatever's, but it's not like, oh, great, we're not friends anymore, there's always that sense that like it's right there. And so we've had very different journeys, but they've really stayed like intertwined. Less, more loosely at times than others. But I think it's just been that ability for both of us to, let the other take the space and time that they need to come back in, to grow, and just always be willing to let each of us grow as we need to, but knowing that it's like this permanent safety net of like always going to be there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think what's always been true is that if we were in, as I call it, the shit, if either of us was ever really in the shit, we were going to be like, what do you need? I'll stop what I'm doing. And, here I am. What do we need to do? Right. I'm on the phone. Let's talk. Right. And that was always important, but we also knew how to give each other over the course of our friendship, each of us keeps going back to school.
Yeah, no
At some
kidding.
point, one, we have to stop. Because that's also, it's always been this time suck of like, I'm working and I'm going to school and I'm raising kids and I'm doing, it's like,
Right.
we need to stop getting degrees. What are we doing? But I agree with you 100%. I think there's always been, there's been room for change. We've both had very, big changes in our faith journey, in relationships, in where we live and what we do. But we've always, I think one thing I've always admired about you is like you're one of the most unconditional people, like in terms of how you love others. You just let people be themselves. And I know that I can be like, okay, I'm gonna say something crazy now. And you're like, lay it on me, right? Like,
Oh,
let's do it. Right. And that's always been such a help to me, right? And to know that I could rely on that. Um,
and I think the same, like I remember some specific times being sort of like, can I say these things? Is it, and coming to you and you saying like, there is no judgment here. Like we are, like, I am just here to listen.
yeah.
And then like the actual physical response to being told that
Yeah.
is quite incredible. And
Yeah.
knowing it too, right? Trusting it. Like there's probably people that would say that and you're like, yeah, whatever, I don't
Maybe,
trust
right.
it.
Right, right.
But like I know that, and now it's not even a question of that. I think it's just like you were saying, like these spiritual journeys that we've been on where we've kind of come to these places where we, you know, really start questioning things and whatnot. And it feels safe to be able to say, hey, I'm doing this, or I'm thinking this, or I'm feeling
Right.
that,
Yeah.
and with hesitancy and you just saying, like, just opening up like this space of like, this is a safe place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we recently, I called, just for those of you listening, I called Jelisa and said, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something that I'm uncomfortable with, that I need to say out loud to you, because I need to know, A, if I've let something happen that I shouldn't have, and B, I need someone to check my morality on something, right? Like just my decision making, my ethics, and it was hard for me even saying it, but I knew you were the person that I would say it to, and you might be like, oh, okay, right? Like, all
Talk
right,
about
let's talk about
that.
that, right? It's the, seriously, where my bodies are buried. Like, all the things I've done, said, thought of, whatever. And I know that I can say, I'm going to say this out loud, and I'm not even sure I believe it yet. Right. And that you're
Yeah.
going to hold that without being like, have you lost your mind? You might think I've lost my mind, and you might say, have you lost your mind? But it's not like from a judgmental, like, and now I must hang up and get away from you place. Right. And you and I have both had enough of that in our lives, of people that backed away from our curiosity or our questions or whatever. So, the one thing we talked about before was, when we lived in Albuquerque, and we were maybe 20-25 minutes away from each other max, there were plenty of times that we, just didn't see each other. We would go months, and we might call, or, we might be connected through a group or something, but we didn't necessarily see each other. And now we talk every day, basically, sometimes more,
Yeah.
multiple times a day. I know what your schedule is more than I
Right.
ever would have known then, right? And so I think about, like, people who live in a city with their best friend or live close enough to them. My encouragement would be like, go see your friend.
Go do it. Go hang out. Just meet up. Right. Swing
Like,
by after work, whatever. Yeah.
go see your friend, because, I think like, oh, it's such a long journey across Paseo, right? Each other.
All the way across the bridge.
So far, there's so much traffic, right? Meanwhile, now there's like an ocean and a whole country between us. And we regularly would be happy to say, hey, come over, right? But it's really
Right.
hard to do.
Really tough now.
13 hours later, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the things, like when I think about sort of the breadth of our friendship, like I would
Yeah.
encourage people, like, see each other, spend time together if you have that
In person. Yeah.
fortune, right? Yeah. So okay, here's my last question for you.
Okay.
If you were going to give younger Jelisa some advice, based on what you know now, that might be beneficial to those who are listening, women and girls who are listening? What would it be?
I think it would be um to just let yourself feel and don't shut yourself down.
Yeah.
I think I consider that quite a bit. So I'm talking to my current self too. Really, if I could head it off at the pass and kind of say, listen, um, yeah, it's hard. And maybe Lee is the only one listening, right? Maybe no one else wants to have any part of it or listen. Um, just feel what you feel and tell the people you love how you feel, because it's just it's probably harder to work later to tear the walls back down
Yeah.
than it was to build them in the first place. So
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think, there's so much when we guard ourselves and don't say what we're thinking and don't let ourselves have the feeling we feel. I think it's kind of what we said before about women's health. Like sometimes we won't let ourselves really feel what we're actually feeling because we're like, I'm the only one who feels that.
right.
And really, of course not. Of course you're not. Right. But it just feels so alone in it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's that element of like, if I guard my feelings, then I won't get as hurt. But the truth is, hurt's coming, right?
Yeah.
Like that's life.
It's
Um,
coming, and hiding and ignoring your feelings is hurtful as well.
yeah,
So
yeah. And I think, we've talked a lot about like, and we talk about Brene Brown talks about it, right? Like you also miss the joy
yeah,
because you're so guarded in avoiding the hurt that sometimes you dull the joy, right?
totally.
And really, like if we can just let ourselves really feel what we're feeling and say, I'll survive that feeling.
Yeah,
And
I can get through this.
I can share that
Yeah.
with somebody, right? Yeah, I think that's great advice. That's great advice. Well, thanks for being my friend.
Always. Yeah.
And for letting me interview you. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for sticking through it with me, because it's been interesting. It's fun though, right?
Still on the journey. Exactly. It's still fun.
Yeah.
I mean, the best thing about this is you have so many, when you have a friend this long, it's like having sisters, right? You have a sister, I have a
Oh
sister.
yeah.
You have so many things that are just in your language between each other that anybody else listening would think you were nuts. Like just the way we talk to each other, the way, the engagement. And so everything can be so much funnier because it's
Oh
just
yeah.
easy to like get right to the heart of the laughter because you're like, remember that? Yeah. Right. So I think I think for me, that's one of the nice things is there's so much I don't have to explain to you.
Right.
Right. You
Oh
just
yeah.
know, right?
No, it's
I
just
don't have
there.
to I don't have to be like, well, and the thing is, I had this kind of family. Nope, she already knows all that.
Don't have to start there.
Nope.
For sure.
So I think that's good. So if you're out there and you're in your early 20s, get yourself a longtime friend.
Yourself a
Find
long time.
find one. And get yourself one of those. It's good.
Works
All
out
right.
great.
I look forward to being an old lady with you
Yes.
in our
Lots of
in our old lady
plans.
house. We have lots of plans, right? Awesome. All right. If you're watching this and you would like to donate to the Malala Fund, you'll notice there's a QR code right down here. You can donate to the Malala Fund, which helps women and girls get education in places where they typically and traditionally hadn't had access. And it helps women get leadership training in places where they might have decent education, but don't necessarily get access to the right network and leadership. So feel free to make a donation and we'll get that money over to the Malala Fund at the end of the series. Thanks, Jelisa.
Thank you.